They destroyed it, not with one moment, with 1,000 small ones, the withdrawals, the deflections, the closeness they allowed, and then immediately dismantled. And now it's gone, completely, and you're watching from wherever you are, trying to understand why the person who seemed so certain about the distance they needed now seems so uncertain about everything. Why does the avoidant who engineered the destruction look lost inside it? Why does the person who had every exit planned, who created the conditions that made the ending inevitable, seem most undone by the ending they caused? What actually happens in the dark interior of an avoidant's psychology after they've done what their pattern does? And this time, the damage is total and irreversible. Most people assume the avoidant moves forward cleanly, that the same machinery that allowed them to detach made them capable of walking away from the wreckage without cost. The truth of what happens to them is the opposite. And understanding it will give you something more valuable than satisfaction. It will give you clarity about what was real, about what the pattern actually costs its owner, and about what you are no longer responsible for carrying. Subscribe if you're here for the kind of truth that actually changes something. Here is the misread that almost everyone makes. They believe the avoidant destroyed the relationship because they didn't care enough. That's the surface interpretation. It's emotionally understandable. It is also wrong. The avoidant destroyed the relationship because they cared in a way their system was not equipped to sustain. Here is the actual mechanism, and it runs deeper than most content in this space ever goes. The avoidance pattern is not indifference. It is a specific and sophisticated defense against the consequences of caring. The architecture was built early, in an environment where emotional closeness produced unpredictability, withdrawal of love, or the collapse of the person being depended on. The child's nervous system learned needing someone is dangerous. Wanting someone is a liability. The safest position is the one where you appear not to need anything at all. That learning became structure, and structure, repeated across every significant relationship in the avoidant's adult life, becomes what looks like a personality, but is actually a wound running a management program. What the wound manages is this: the terror that if they love someone fully, if they let someone fully in, they will either be consumed by the closeness or abandoned at the moment of maximum vulnerability, so the pattern destructs the relationship before either of those outcomes can arrive. It is not malice, it is preemption, but preemption carries a cost that the system was never designed to account for. Because the thing it was preempting, the love, the genuine connection, the specific quality of what you two were building, was real. And the avoidant knew it was real. They felt it even as the pattern was dismantling it. And that knowing, that felt awareness of what was being destroyed in real time, is what produces the dark phase. There are 5 phases that describe what happens to the avoidant after the relationship is gone. Each one is darker and more precise than the last. The first is the constructed confidence phase. In the immediate aftermath, the avoidance system produces what it always produces when the threat of closeness has been removed: a sense of having made the right decision. Externally, they appear self-possessed, settled in their independence. Like someone who has returned to their natural state, internally, the narrative is running at full capacity, the story that justifies the exit, the accumulated list of what wasn't working, what was too much, what they couldn't give and shouldn't have been asked to give, the self-protective cognition that turns the destroyed thing into something that needed to be destroyed. This narrative is not dishonest exactly. Some of it is real. All relationships have genuine frictions, but the narrative is incomplete. It is curated to support the system's decision and exclude the evidence that contradicts it. The exclusion requires effort, and effort, sustained long enough, depletes. The second phase is the narrative fatigue phase. The constructed confidence requires constant maintenance, and maintenance, when it's running against accumulating contradictory evidence, becomes increasingly expensive. Externally, little may be visible. The avoidant is still functioning, still presenting the composed surface. Internally, the narrative is developing cracks. Specific memories are surfacing that the curation is finding harder to exclude. Moments where the connection was genuinely good, not just in retrospect, but in a way the avoidant felt clearly even while the pattern was engineering their exit. The specific quality of what was real, not vague relationship grief. Precise, granular sensory memory, the way something felt, the way something was said, the specific texture of being with someone who knew them in a way they'd never allowed before. This material does not respond to suppression the way the avoidance system expects. It surfaces repeatedly, with increasing specificity, with an emotional weight that the deactivation strategies are failing to contain. The dark phase has begun, not yet fully visible, fully operational. The third phase is the responsibility confrontation phase. This is the most psychologically significant phase, and the one that produces the most distinctive experience for the avoidant. For the first time, or for the first time clearly enough to be unavoidable, the avoidant is confronted with a truth their constructed narrative was designed to prevent. They did this. Not circumstances. Not incompatibility. Not the other person's needs being too great or the timing being wrong. The pattern. Their pattern. The one that has run in every significant relationship they've ever had, producing the same outcome with different people. This is not a comfortable realization. It is not a clean realization. It does not arrive as an insight. It arrives as the slow, grinding, undeniable accumulation of a recognition they have been successfully avoiding for their entire relational life. Externally, this phase may produce behavioral changes that look like restlessness, social withdrawal, a certain flatness in interactions that people close to the avoidant notice without being able to name. Internally, the avoidant is in an existential confrontation with their own pattern. The story in which they are someone who needs space, who is built differently, who simply functions better with more distance. That story is meeting the evidence of what the pattern has actually produced across a lifetime. The evidence is mounting. The story is losing. The fourth phase is the loss specification phase. This is where the dark phase reaches its most acute expression. It is one thing to know in the abstract that you lost something. It is another to feel, with excruciating specificity, exactly what it was. The avoidant in this phase is no longer processing the loss as a general relationship grief. They are processing you. Specifically, the particular qualities you brought, the specific way you made space for them even when they were difficult to be close to. The moments where they almost let you fully in, where the pattern almost didn't run, and what those moments felt like. Externally, this is the phase where a reach becomes most likely, not necessarily directly, often obliquely, a message to a mutual, a glance at your profile, a communication that has no explicit purpose. Internally, the avoidant is experiencing the full emotional weight of a loss they caused, and they are experiencing it without the ability to externalize any of it. Because the person it would naturally move toward, the person who would receive it and help them process it, is the person whose absence is generating it. The loss is complete, and they are alone with it. This is the dark phase fully arrived. The fifth phase is the pattern recognition fracture. This is the phase that rarely gets discussed, and it is, in many ways, the most important one, because it is where genuine change either begins or doesn't. The avoidant is now in possession of two things simultaneously: the specific felt experience of what their pattern cost them, and the beginning of a real question about whether the protection was worth the price. Externally, this may produce almost no visible change. The avoidant is not, characteristically, someone who processes outwardly. Internally, something is fractured that cannot simply be reconstructed. The smooth confidence of the defense, the unchallenged operating assumption that distance is safety and independence is strength, has encountered the evidence of its own consequences too clearly to be unseen. Whether that fracture leads to genuine restructuring or gets repaired back into the same architecture depends on what the avoidant does with it, on whether they seek real support, on whether the fracture stays open long enough to allow something to grow through it. The dark phase is not a happy ending for the avoidant. It is a threshold. What happens at that threshold is entirely their choice. Here, right in the middle of this, I want to pause and ask you something. Are you watching this from a place of pain, trying to understand what happened? Or from a place of having already walked through it, and you're here to confirm that what you went through was real? Drop it in the comments. Seriously, I want to know where you are in this. Your experience in the comments section is what keeps this community real, and it's what helps someone watching 6 months from now feel less alone with exactly what you're feeling right now. Most people, when they understand the dark phase, experience the pull in one direction. They want to be there for it. The compassionate impulse, understanding that the avoidant is suffering, that the suffering is genuine, that they care, makes staying away feel like cruelty. And this is the most important psychological distinction this entire video is building toward. Compassion and availability are not the same thing. You can hold genuine compassion for someone's dark phase without making yourself the resource through which they process it. In fact, and this is what most people miss, if you make yourself available to help the avoidant through their reckoning, you remove the one condition that makes genuine change possible, the full, unmitigated experience of what their pattern costs them without an exit valve. Your availability has historically been that exit valve. Your presence softened the consequence. Your reaching gave the avoidance system something to route toward before the full weight could land. Staying away, genuinely, cleanly, without the ambient availability that has always been present, is the most honest thing you can do for both of you. Not because it's strategic, because it's true. The truth is, the dark phase belongs to them. The growth, if it comes, must be theirs. And you have your own phase to move through, one that doesn't require their reckoning to complete. 5 principles govern how you move through your own parallel processing while the avoidant navigates theirs. The first is called parallel processing recognition. You are not waiting for the avoidant to finish their phase before you begin yours. Both phases are running simultaneously. Parallel processing recognition means you understand that your grief, your growth, your forward movement does not have to wait for their collapse to conclude. You process on your own timeline, you build on your own timeline, and you do not synchronize your healing to their reckoning. The second principle is called cost truthfulness. Part of what makes this moment hard is the temptation to minimize what it cost you, to focus on their pain rather than your own, because focusing on yours requires facing it directly. Cost truthfulness means you allow yourself the honest accounting of what this dynamic actually took from you, what you gave, what you waited for, what you adjusted yourself to accommodate. That accounting is not bitterness. It is the foundation of genuine self-respect going forward. The third is called pattern naming for yourself. The avoidant is in the process of confronting their pattern. You have your own to name. The pattern that stayed too long. The pattern that interpreted inconsistency as complexity. The pattern that made hope the primary operating mode, even as evidence accumulated that the hope was not connected to reality. Naming your pattern, clearly, without self-blame, but honestly, is what prevents you from bringing it into the next relationship at full strength. The fourth principle is called non-rescue commitment. This is the hardest principle for most people who love someone with genuine depth. Non-rescue commitment means you hold the understanding that rescuing the avoidant from their dark phase, being available, being warm, being the place they run toward when the reckoning becomes too heavy, is not the act of love it feels like. It is the interruption of the one process that might actually change them. Genuine love here is staying away. Not with cruelty, with the honest understanding that what they need to find, they can only find in the absence you've made real. The fifth is called identity reclamation. Who were you before the dynamic shaped you? What parts of yourself were quiet for too long? The directness, the standards, the self-trust? Because the dynamic rewarded accommodation over authenticity? Identity reclamation is the active, specific practice of returning to those parts. Not as rebellion, as reorientation. You are not recovering from a relationship. You are recovering yourself from the gradual erosion of a dynamic that asked more of you than it offered. Here is the realization this video has been building toward. The dark phase the avoidant is living inside is not a mystery. It is the structural, inevitable consequence of a pattern that has been running long enough to produce irreversible damage to something that was genuinely worth keeping. You did not cause the dark phase by being too much. You caused it, in the most precise sense, by being real enough that your loss could not be managed into background noise. That is not your wound. That is your worth. You don't define yourself by what their pattern couldn't hold. You define yourself by what you brought to something that deserved better, and by what you're building now that you're no longer inside it. You don't wait for their dark phase to end before your light phase begins. You are already in it, right now. In the choosing, in the building, in the refusal to organize your life around someone else's eventual readiness. You don't require their reckoning to know what you're worth. You already know. The dark phase is theirs. The next chapter is yours. Zoom all the way out. Every avoidant who reaches the dark phase is encountering, for possibly the first time with full force, the cost of a defense that was built to protect them from love but ended up preventing it. Self-worth is not recovered in the moment they realize what they lost. It is built in the period during which you stopped waiting for them to. Emotional intelligence is not the ability to understand why the dark phase happens. It is the ability to hold that understanding, fully, without bitterness, without hope that is not grounded in evidence, and make your own decisions with the clarity it produces. Personal power is not watching someone live inside the consequences of what they chose. It is being so invested in what you are becoming that you don't have the attention to spare. They are in their dark phase. You are in your build phase. Both are real. Only one of them is yours to live inside. Live inside it. If this video reached you somewhere specific, if it named something you've been carrying alone, I want to hear it. Drop a comment. What part landed? What are you still working through? Your words matter here. And if you want to understand what happens after the dark phase, what genuine change in an avoidant actually looks like, and how to tell it from the temporary behavior shifts that come from fear of loss rather than real growth, the next video is already there. Don't wait. Go watch it now.